morning, everyone, and welcome to our second annual copyright event on campus. I am the co-chair for the Technology Across the Curriculum Committee, and I would like to welcome you to this wonderful event that is co-sponsored by our committee, IRT, and the Chang Library. Last year, we had Brendan Butler speak to us about copyright. We are part of a countrywide event celebrating fair use. A few years back, Dr. Miller and Jane Hutchinson developed a copyright policy for the university, which was adopted. Education on copyright is an important part, and today we will focus on fair use. First, let me introduce Jane Hutchinson, Associate Director of IRT, who will discuss fair use, along with Victoria Wagner and Yvonne Roux from the Chang Library.
Thank you and welcome. I hope that all of you have clickers now because we handed out clickers, and this part of the session is going to be a little interactive. Okay, so you have your clickers in hand. You'll see A, B, C, D. So we're going to say, I'm going to have you answer the question, what is fair use? If you'll click either A, B, C, or D, we will get the results. So I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, I'm going to close the polling. 1, 2, 3, it's closed. Okay, number B. Item B, it allows the copying and use of copyrighted materials in certain circumstances. That got the most votes. 85% of you voted on that. Fair use is part of the Copyright Act of 1976. It is the right to use unlicensed material and is intended to be technology neutral. Hopefully today, through the panel and discussion, we will help you understand how to use and think about copyright, and especially your right to use copyrighted material without permission or payment when you make or use a work, whether it's a blog entry, a journal article, your lesson plans, using materials with your students, technical manual, or brochure. So let's go to the next question, which Victoria will handle.
Again, go ahead and use your clicker to answer the question, which fair use factor is the most important? Let's see. Okay. Do I just hit return to close it? Yep. Return. All right, this is wonderful. The answer is E. They all hold the same value. And I want to talk a little bit about what the 4 factors are, because that will help to explain the rest of the day for you. Part of the copyright law gives the exception for fair use, which invites you and encourages you to consider these 4 factors when you're determining, can I use a copyrighted work for whatever I want to use it for. For number 1, the purpose, most people here at William Patterson are going to say, I'm using it for educational purposes, but that doesn't allow you to just check that box off. We really want you to think about, why are you using the copyrighted work? Are you using it to criticize? Are you using it to analyze? Are you using it to make a parody? Are you using it to make a comment? And more, the courts are looking at, are you transforming your use of this from what the original was intended for why you want to use it? But that's just one thing you need to think about. The second thing you need to think about is, how do you describe the thing that you want to use? And there's a continuum between, is it factual? Is it fiction? Is it published? Is it unpublished? Is it statistics? Is it highly creative? And within that continuum, you need to think about things that are published and factual are more fair to use. They're more discoverable and the expectation is that you would use them. The more creative things, think about unpublished letters, and if you're writing a book and you're using those, you would probably need to get permission. The next thing you need to think about is how much are you using? This is the exhilarating and frustrating part of fair use, because there is not a number, there is not a percent, there is not a proportion. The amount really ties back into part one, the purpose. Why are you using it? You need to have a clear understanding. What are the learning objectives for your course? What is the purpose? What is the reason that you need to use this, want to use this? And that should dictate how much you need to use. What is appropriate for you to get that learning objective met? It could be a part, it could be the whole thing. And so that's another thing that you need to consider. The final factor, most people think, well, this probably has the most weight, the market value. Taking into consideration, how does your use of this copyrighted work affect the market's value of the original work? And a lot of conversations I've had, the faculty members said, how can I even guess what that is? And maybe I'm making the market value increase because I'm actually drawing attention to and interest in the original. I've also heard I'm not even in the market because the library is password protecting what I want to use, or Blackboard is password protecting what I want to use. But please consider if what you are using or creating is maybe a course pack so your students don't need to buy a textbook this semester. Then you are impacting the marketplace, and you really need to look at the other three factors. So all hold the same value, and really what fair use is a balancing act where you're looking at all four factors all the time. And each instance, you need to start from the beginning and take all the circumstances into consideration when you're making your decision. This is fair, and I should go ahead and use it.
Okay, your opportunity to use a clicker again. Fair use applies to whom? A, faculty, B, students, C, writers, D, news reporters, E, the general population, or F, all of the above. Okay, I'm going to close the polling. And the correct answer is all of the above. We all use fair use for various reasons, and it's important to be aware that you do have that right. Okay, this is more an opinion rather than a factual statement. I am comfortable in applying fair use. And I'll give you a minute to answer how you feel about this. Okay, I'm closing the polling. And, okay, I think we all often have questions. I know it took me a long time to begin to feel comfortable with this, and sometimes I'm still kind of stumped. So the fact that most of you somewhat agree, that's a good step forward. Okay, I'm now going to turn the program over to Bella again, who'll introduce our panel.
Okay, so we have a distinguished panel of faculty members from various disciplines that will discuss how to apply your fair use rights to copyrighted material in your everyday teaching and learning. I would like to welcome Heidi Rempel from the art department, Chris Weaver from the English department, David Dempsey from the music department, and Donna Potaco from the Science Enrichment Center. And please.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Heidi Rempel, and I am the Visual Resources Curator with the Art Department and the University Galleries. And what I'd like to talk to you about today, a subject that's really close to my heart because my background is both in art history and in library studies, is fair use in images and using images in teaching. So I'm going to go ahead and give you today just a basic introduction for how to use images, specifically copyrighted images, correctly in your presentations. The important thing to note about images is that the fair use of still images, and I'm not including video in that because we have another presenter who's going to be discussing that, is that still images differ from the way that we can use text, video, and other formats. And one of the fundamental reasons for that is that you can't quote part of an image. So the whole amount argument is significantly diminished when you're talking about using an image. So let's say we want to talk about the Charlie Hebdo killings and the incredible wealth of images and cartoons that were produced as an outpouring of creativity in response to that incident. If I just look at approximately 15%, which is a guideline that a lot of people talk about in discussing the amount of something that you can quote and still have it be fair use, that's the image on the left. You can't see what the whole image is about. You can't make a point about it. But if you look at the whole, you can see the pencil, the broken pencil, and then the resharpened pencil going on to continue to create even in the face of terrorist action. And being able to use the whole image is really vital in education, be it teaching or study. On the right-hand side, you see, your left, you see an image of a liver cell. And on the right, you see an image of a map showing the Islamic State and the progress, which is absolutely current and up to date, of where the Islamic State is currently controlling, where various actions have taken place, and so forth. So both of those images can be used by their respective disciplines. So biology, history, geography, current events, they're relevant in a lot of disciplines and not just art. When you consider how to use images, you need to bear in mind that fair use with images doesn't apply to the following instances. And that is images that have Creative Commons licenses, because those licenses specifically list how you may or may not use that image. It doesn't apply to images in the public domain because those are free for use anyway. And it doesn't apply, in the most part, to images that are from stock photo sites or licensed image databases, because again, those have specific usage requirements that must be met in order for you to use those images. What fair use does apply to when you're discussing images are copyrighted images that you want to use in presentations, that you want to reproduce either in papers, including theses and dissertations, that you want to include in course materials, such as websites, blog posts if they're for educational usage, and online study materials. You can also adapt images for teaching and classroom work. You can store images for repeated use, and you can share images among institutions, specifically educational and cultural institutions, if they are facilitating teaching and study. And where I've gotten these 6 different uses is from the Visual Resources Association's recent publication on the fair use of images. And one of the really important things to remember about fair use is that an increasing number of professional organizations are publishing guidelines about how to apply fair use in those fields. And courts are really overwhelmingly embracing these kinds of guidelines as published by professional associations. So if you're in doubt, it's a great idea to look for the professional association in the field that you're trying to address and take a look to see what they've said about fair use. And that will help you make your argument. There's a really big caveat, and it applies to all of fair use, but really, especially to images. It needs to be a fundamental part of your work. You need to be analyzing that image. You can't just use it for fun. So I can't walk in and decide to use a cute picture of a squirrel in the snow today because I want to start out my class with something funny and exciting because it's snowy outside. For that, you can do what I did. You can go onto Flickr, look up Creative Commons. This image, they're happy to let me use it for educational purposes as long as I attribute it. And indeed, in my list of sources at the end of the presentation, I have it attributed. Or in another presentation, you might choose to cite it on the image itself. It really depends on you and your preference, but it does need to have a citation. Or you can go to a public domain image. There are lots of databases for those, and I'd be happy to share some of the names afterward if you're interested in that. But those images you can use for fun. Copyrighted images need to have a purpose in your work. So what does that actually allow you to do? You can present with images, and this is the image of an art history faculty member giving a presentation on Vincent van Gogh. Now, the image itself is no longer under copyright, but the reproduction of the image has almost certainly been taken by someone who is more recent than when images became part of the public domain. But because they're discussing the image and because they're using it for educational purposes, they can use the whole digital image and they can use it for a faculty lecture or for a presentation about their research. You can also use copyrighted images in papers, including theses and dissertations. A lot of us know that the Disney Corporation is very, very paranoid about how their images and how reproductions of their images are used. But this, the image that you see, is a screenshot that I pulled from an online published master's thesis on anti-Nazi propaganda in Disney cartoons. Donald Duck is absolutely copyrighted. And if you decided that you wanted to open up a restaurant themed around Donald Duck, you would get in trouble with the Disney Corporation. But this student has gone through and analyzed the work as part of her research, and therefore she has been able to publish it online in digital format using this copyrighted image, despite and Disney really can't do a whole lot about it because it's protected by fair use. You can also use images for online study. Thumbnails are always transformative. So if you want to build up a list of thumbnails on your website, on your class website, on your blog, they're always protected. But if you want to use higher resolution images, they need to be used, again, for educational purposes, but you can post them on course websites or in electronic study materials. You need to try and do your best to make sure that those are limited in access to your students, or that there is a disclaimer on the site notifying users that images are for teaching, study, and research only. You do need to make that good faith effort. You need to provide attributions and use access restrictions if possible, but as long as you are using those images as a vital part of the work that you're doing, the analysis that you're doing, the research that you're doing, you are permitted to use them. You can also adapt images for teaching and student classroom work. And for studio art faculty, you can go and you can copy a famous work of art. This one is out of copyright anyway, but even if you want to go in and copy a contemporary piece in a museum, you can do that so long as it is for the purposes of a student learning how to create the same sort of shading or copy brush strokes. It needs to be clear that it's not being done to then go on to make some sort of money off of it in terms of fraudulent sale. But you are able to copy works in that way as part of the learning process. And you can even completely transform a work. So on the left, you see an Andy Warhol. On the right, you see a work by the artist Jane Perkins, who's gone through and used found objects to recreate, in a sense, that work. But she's completely transformed it. It's completely distinguishable. You would never look at that and think that it was an Andy Warhol. So she's saying something about that work, and in the process, she's transformed it to be a completely new piece of artwork. You can store images for use. If you have images in PowerPoint that you use on a regular basis, you are entitled to use those and have backup copies of them. This is an image of, it's a screenshot of our image database with the Visual Resources collection. And for that purpose, I've gone through and I've made digital copies of images from books that faculty members are using for teaching and research. And those images need to be images that are being actively used. I can't go through and just copy a whole book because a faculty member would like to have it. They think that a certain image is nice and they want to have it around. It needs to be something that they will use, but I am able to have my password protected database that faculty can access in order to store these images that are being actively used for educational purposes. And we can share images across institutions. This is from ArtStore Shared Shelf, which is one of the many repositories of digital images out there. This is a collection of images that Cornell has put together on the visual iconography of Obama. And so you see a lot of different ads that people have put together, campaign posters, and they're able to do that because they're not trying to profit from these images. They're making them available for study and research to individuals, both externally as well as in various educational institutions. So, to conclude, don't be afraid to use copyrighted images. You're entitled to do so by fair use if you follow the guidelines that are laid out. You need to be sure to give credit where credit is due. You need to make sure that you're citing those images, that you're attributing them properly, and if you have any questions about it, ask. Ask the librarians. Feel free to reach out to me. I am more than happy to help, but use them because they're a fantastic resource. They're really vital for great education and research, and we should be making them available. Thank you.
My presentation is a little bit different because I'm not speaking as an expert. I won't tell you about fair use, but I will tell you about my a class that I teach and a project that the class did that involved fair use and involved me thinking about strategies about how I was going to do this project with my class and obstacles that I encountered. So the class is a required class for all students at William Patterson. It's Experiences in Literature. It's one of their UCC foundational courses. And so it's a literature and writing course, and I'm particularly, as a writing teacher, concerned with difficulties my students have integrating material into their papers. So if they're just doing one thing in their papers, like telling a story or making an argument, they tend to do okay with that. But when they have different threads that they're trying to synthesize and pull together, they really struggle with pulling those threads together. So I wanted to develop an assignment that would particularly focus on having different threads of material and how to put them together. And what I noticed is that students are fairly good at doing this in videos, even though they're really not good at doing it in writing. So they really sort of struggle in their papers to know, what do I do with this source that I found? How do I put it into my paper? Where do I put it into my paper? What do I say about it? As I'm sure anyone who's taught any courses that use writing at William Patterson have encountered that difficulty. But I noticed that all sorts of people were putting up stuff in YouTube. And that in YouTube, their compositions, albeit video compositions, were often quite elaborate and quite clever. Particularly, I'm thinking of, if you're familiar with the Bad Lip Sync series, or the Honest Trailer series. There are a bunch of these series on YouTube about individual YouTube users taking clips from movies and sort of repurposing them and putting different audio and different music and commentary. And there's a lot of them, and they're really well done. And in fact, my students are actually really good at doing this. So I was thinking, well, if I have them I teach a horror-themed course. So we read Dracula, and we read The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and we analyze them. And so I had them write a paper about a monster, about vampires or the Jekyll and Hyde monster or zombies. And I'm having them write a paper looking at some different sources in fiction and in film and in television. And at the same time, I thought, well, I'll have them do a video project as well. And then we'll talk about how that bringing those threads together work both in video and in the paper. So fair use was not my reason for having this assignment. My reason for having this assignment was what I wanted to do as an English teacher. But it brought me up against a lot of fair use issues and made me think as a teacher, how am I going to handle this? So I want to play I don't want to play the whole thing. This is a 5-minute video. I'm going to play like the first 30 seconds of it, just to have you see what sort of things my students were doing. And this was a paper and a video presentation on vampires.
Have you said your goodbyes to the light?
Call me the end of your world, call me your genocide, 'cause I'm a venomous girl, just like a spider bite.
So I'll stop there, but you could see just in that 30-second clip, there's a small clip from Interview with the Vampire, and you'll notice the little movie clips logo. That's where the students went to get that clip. And there's some still images of different vampires. And then the students proceeded from there to sort of analyze images of the vampire in fiction and film and how they've changed and why they've changed. So that was the project that I wanted them to do. In having them do that project, I felt as a teacher pretty comfortable about fair use, because it was clearly transformative, that they were, as Heidi was saying, that they weren't just doing this for entertainment, they weren't just putting it up as a standalone, they were integrating it into an analysis. But having said that, when I was preparing to do this project, I was doing a lot of reading about how to upload media clips and problems with loading media clips and where that interfered with fair use, or where people thought it might interfere with fair use, because I was trying to make a decision about what platform I wanted the students to upload this into. And for a while I was thinking about having them just upload the videos to YouTube, because I actually wanted to make this not just password protected behind Blackboard for my class. I actually had this utopian vision that it would be up on the web, and we'd be telling lots of people about it, and that people would go to it and comment on it. So I wanted to figure out what platform to do it, and I was reading a lot about YouTube. I was reading a lot of complaints about YouTube. And this is where it's interesting. We can talk about what fair use is in law and in practice, but that doesn't mean just because we're constitutionally protected that fair use doesn't get, that's the way it works out in reality. And what I was reading is that YouTube, and this was a couple of years ago, YouTube now avails itself of a particular software program, so that every video that's uploaded to YouTube, they can run software on that video, and the software tries to match whatever you upload, both in terms of audio and video, with what exists in a database, whether it's a song or a movie clip. And if, at least the things that I was reading said, people were complaining that if YouTube got a match, if they said, aha, I know this is a Katy Perry song, or, oh, aha, I know this is a Disney movie, they would take the video down. They would just take it down, not a cease and desist, they wouldn't look at it to review it to see if it was fair use. They would just say, no, it's taken. And I read a lot of complaints about people who said, my video was taken down. It was clearly transformative. I wrote to YouTube and they never wrote back, or they wrote back a form letter. So I didn't want to have my class doing this project in the middle of it and have it taken down. So that made me look for a different platform, even though I was sure it was fair use. And thankfully for me, we have a just kick-ass library media support group here. And they really helped me figure out what the best thing to do. And eventually what I did is I had the students' videos uploaded to NJV, and then I created a separate website. And I gave everybody a link to go to that website, so I didn't have to go through YouTube. But I bring that up because it's one thing to say, oh, here are the fair use guidelines. It's another to actually, without lawsuits, keep proprietary corporations from infringing on fair use, even if they don't have the right to do so. So we proceeded. The videos were awesome. I hope that's like a little teaser video that I played, because I'm doing it again this semester. And in April, I'll have 6 different student presentations. And I hope maybe it's part of the Living Writing series. So it's open to the public. And I hope people will come, and we'll have clickers and you can vote on them. And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
What's fair with fair use? What I thought might be helpful is if we went over some of the challenges that we've come across and some of the solutions that we came up with to overcome some of those challenges. So the first challenge was we had students complaining that they couldn't come into our Science Enrichment Center, which is a support center, to access our physical resources. Well, the problem is we had no money and we had no time for resource creation. So the solution we came up with is we realized that there is a plethora of online resources that are created by other institutions and instructions. What was required is that we had to find them, to organize them, aggregate them, assemble them, and link them. So this site, which we created, is now, last year we had over almost 83,000 views from 50 countries and 5 continents. So it's fairly popular right now. And we have about 500 pages and tens of thousands of links. And I'm bringing you to McGraw-Hill, which has wonderful resources that they leave online for individuals to use. And if students want to go into any chapter in anatomy and physiology, they can look for animations, they can look for flashcards, course-wide puzzles, or if they're in a metacognitive mood, they can actually go into some exams and quizzes and see how they're doing. So this is a very, very popular site that of one of the 500 pages, 10,000 links that we have. The next challenge we had is we wanted to make a rocks and minerals tutorial with our geology department, and we needed images, lots of images, because rocks are like people. There's no 2 rocks the same. So we went to Creative Commons, and Creative Commons gives creators ways that they can use their works without applying fair use criteria or obtaining permission. So this is the front page of the Rocks and Minerals tutorial. You can see 3 of the pictures there. And if I click into any of the links, you can see the beautiful pictures we were able to find through fair use. And every single page that you go into, you're going to find different images. And there's also lots of different rocks where we had alternative images also with. Now, this site that I'm giving you, this link, is actually a search engine for independent organizations which hosts Creative Commons. You probably recognize some of these sites, Flickr, Google, YouTube, and I don't know if you can see it from where you are, but actually different media is supported by these different host sites. This particular site I'm bringing you to, we've used fairly often is Flickr. Flickr has 6 licensing formats. The least restrictive is attribution. Attribution means you can let others copy, distribute, display, perform, and you can do derivative works on it. And you can see there's over 58 million pictures just in attribution license. The most restrictive is the non-commercial, no derivative, and that would be nonprofit, and no derivative means you can't make derivative works based on that. I actually went through the numbers on each of these licenses, and it added up to about a third of a billion photos that are available on Flickr for you to use, and the quality is beautiful. You do have to put the license, as was previously mentioned, you do have to put the license on the work. This is one of the rock pictures that we came to. I like Wikimedia. It hosts numerous types of media. This particular one, we were looking for background images, and we were looking for this symbol. This symbol means it's public domain, which means that anyone can use this work for any purpose without any conditions, unless there are some conditions required by law. The next challenge is, for my class, I wanted to create a reflective discussion on the electromagnetic spectrum. So I was looking for, again, images, but I also wanted videos. So I went back to Wikimedia, but this time I went for videos, and you can see they categorize them, and they have quite a few of them. And to give you an idea, I'm going to cut the sound on this, but I'm going to go through this and show you some of the media that is actually available for you. So I'm going to go through, because this is actually a 6-7 minute one. And I'm going to jump. That's a nuclear bomb going off, by the way. This is a beautiful one of the sun. Let me see if I can find the other one. And this is all freeware. You can put whatever voice you want on it. Most of this is from the government, which is public domain. There is military, NASA, a fair amount of higher education institutions also put this information online. You'll probably just recognize William Patterson. So you can see the beautiful images, videos are available. And actually, at the end of this, I have about a minute of license attribution. So you do have to attribute every single one of those images you do use. So there, about a minute of that 6-minute video is the attributions. Okay. Now, the last challenge we had is we wanted to create a marketing video that would motivate our students to investigate the SEC. We wanted the message to be entertaining. We wanted it to be nonverbal. We wanted it to get their attention. And we wanted to use popular music without violating copyright. So our solution was to use small amounts of several pieces of popular music, and this is what we came out with. It's called The Helper. Let me play. I'm going to get the music on this one. You probably recognize Jaws. Good student versus not so good student. Party girl. She likes videos. Shooting. And of we want to introduce you to the Science Enrichment Center. And this gave us a nice opportunity to show them what the center looked like. This is our good student using the books, computers, study group, models, Mission Impossible, so it was a nice way we could use pieces of music for the students. So anyway, thank you for listening, and Dave will now talk a little bit more about music.
It's funny, up until a minute ago, I thought you were trying to motivate the students, I really did, to investigate the Securities and Exchange Commission. I was looking, I said, when's she going to get to her point? Who made this video?
Violations.
Fair use doctrine is a huge part of many things that we do in the music department, both in terms of printed music rights, and in terms of audio. So I'll highlight one instance of each of those. The first example is an entity that has now existed for about 6 years called the Living Jazz Archives. It's a 1,000 square foot space now in College Hall, and that archive, which is now growing and thriving, was really the brainchild. This is a very timely presentation, because that archive is the brainchild of legendary jazz trumpeter Clark Terry, who passed away Saturday at 94 years old. And he came to us now almost exactly 10 years ago and announced to us that because of the way he highly regarded our jazz program, that he wanted his archive to be here at William Patterson. And my immediate response was, with all due respect, knowing that the Smithsonian has been courting you for a decade, why Wayne, New Jersey? Why did you make this choice? And his reply not only established the name of the Living Jazz Archives, but it speaks directly to the fair use doctrine. He said, oh, those places are all for dead people. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you give something to the Smithsonian, it's buried in the third sub-basement, and you need to have, put on the white lab coat and make an appointment, and somebody stands over you, and you get 23 minutes with whatever manuscript you want, and then the next person comes in. He said, I have really devoted my entire life to education and to young students, and he said, and here's the statement right here. He said, I want my materials to be stored at the highest archival levels, but I want copies to be made available to a constantly renewing group of young, super talented jazz students coming to William Patterson. I want to relate the archive concept to an educational institution, and I realized that he had redefined the word archive at that point. But of course, as you see, the whole basis of it is fair use. And that goes on constantly. This is Clark, as you see, I think, and this is the induction ceremony from the 05 logo that we really should kind of Photoshop out of there so we can use this. We'll alter our own image for our better use. And Clark's performing, and actually this is very immediate. I can proudly tell you that my truly sleep-deprived state is because our students, a later version of this ensemble and two small groups sold out Dizzy's Club Coca-Cola last night at Jazz at Lincoln Center performing this music. If we had been paid, now fair use is out and we would have had to get performance rights for all this music. But somebody made a lot of money last night, but it wasn't us. And so we're still within the fair use doctrine because we were there as the students of William Patterson, New Jersey, and a faculty member. If we had been there as whatever, the David Dempsey Big Band playing this music, that's a whole other deal. Here's Clark with, this is a unabashed plug, slightly off topic, but not really. Clark with Justin Coughlin, who is the subject of a film March 12th. You might make a note. We're going to screen this film at William Patterson. It's called Keep On Keepin' On. Keep On Keepin' On. And it's a documentary made about the relationship of these two gentlemen. This is Justin, actually, he's a blind pianist who graduated in '08. This is actually one of the first meetings of these two, which their relationship continued long after he graduated. And it chronicles that. The movie was made by one of our other jazz majors, and it ended up winning Best Documentary at the Tribeca Festival, at festival in Canada, and it was actually on the top 10 list for an Oscar for Best Documentary, and then didn't unfortunately make it to the top 5. But anyway, March 12th, if you can come. It'll be a memorable evening. We're going to reunite all the students who studied with Clark back here for the first time, and we'd already scheduled this. Part of the presentation was we were going to Skype Clark in. So, yeah, who knew that this was going to happen? So, you can see a typical manuscript. Here's a typical archival problem. These are ink manuscripts from a 1970 big band arrangement that Clark performed all over the world for 10 years. And they're actually in pretty good shape, except you can see what's starting to happen. This paper's starting to deteriorate. So we rescue it. It's not just a fair use project. We first rescue it, make a work copy. Sometimes we put it onto, if you're not a musician, you may not be familiar with Finale and Sibelius, but they're essentially music processors. They're Microsoft Word for notes. And so we'll re-engrave the entire arrangement into Finale or Sibelius, which then makes it a digital product, makes it easier to use, but it's also more dangerous in terms of fair use. It has to be very carefully guarded, because then it's just a quick drag and drop, and all of a sudden it's everywhere. This has happened, thankfully, only once. Happened with, first of all, thanks to Ann. Welcome back. So thanks to Ann for helping us build that archive. Clark's date book, one of the pages got photoed on a student's cell phone and just went viral. I still get a couple of emails a week. How many of these do you have? What are the other pages? And that's just one page of a date book. So the gist of the archive is to store materials like this in, an acid-free environment, interleafed acid-free paper between every one of these pages, in an acid-free folder, in an acid-free box. But then these pieces are also in the books of our big band and in the books of our students. So they're constantly being used. And of course, it's not only that we're within the law, we're within the wishes of the people who have donated the items. So just a couple more quick. This is one of Clark's blues tunes. This is sort of one generation earlier than the ink. This is his composition, 1961, Nasty Blues. And as he says, the subtitle is, I got them blues so bad, I have to resort to Old English. So that's why the E is on the end of it. So, and you can see we can't use this version because it actually starts at, even if you can't read music, it starts at the end of the first line and then you go back. It's not really unusable. This is almost like a writer's sketch, This is James Williams, two versions, the manuscript and the printed version. Some of the students like to use the printed manuscript because it makes them feel more immediately involved with the artist, and that's, of course, the living part of the mission. And this is the original part. Some of you may know this. It's despite Thad Jones. Thad Jones, by the way, was the founding director of our jazz program, and despite his best efforts and the best efforts of the lyricist Alec Wilder, this tune has become a holiday favorite. Both of them were adamant that it's about the birth of a baby. It's not about the birth of that baby, if you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, both estates make a lot of money every Christmas, so nobody's complaining. And this, as you can see, this paper's starting to turn to Swiss cheese. And this is in fairly good shape, but this is another reclamation project that we have undertaken. On a broader sense, in terms of printed music, I think my colleagues will share my feelings that, with all due respect to the students in my big band, I will never, ever let them have an original copy of music in their folders. You know, it's just too dangerous, even if it's a store-bought thing. Of course, this stuff will never leave the archive, but even if it's a published piece, there's just too much chance that it's going to get whatever left at the student center and disappeared. So we all use fair use in that sense. Dave, do you share? My colleague David Philp is here. And yeah, we all, anybody that's in the performance area at all is making fair use doctrine part of their hourly lives. The other way that we use are sort of in the realm of the fair use doctrine is something that's very new. That is the NJV Jazz Archive or Jazz Collection. Does everybody know what NJV is? I can quickly describe it as a large digital repository that has been designed as a way to collect video documentaries about the state of New Jersey. And our Jazz Room concert series is the longest running jazz concert series on a campus-based series in the nation, 37 years. And under the part of the each week's contract, we are allowed to make a single archival copy of that performance. And over the history of the series, first we started with the dreaded cassette tapes, and then we went to CDs. And they would go to the library listening lab right around the corner here, and they would stay there for 4 years during any typical student's time here. And they would be able to go back and check their performances. And oh, by the way, not only do we have featured artists, but every week our students do a little opening act. So half of the performance CDs are of major jazz artists who visit here. The other half are of our own students, all playing copyrighted material. With the advent of NJVid, well, Ted Clancy, most of you probably know Ted, who retired now already 3 years ago. Time flies, might be 3 years ago. He started to digitize all of the taped collection. And then with the tireless efforts of Tom and with Greg Madison, Henry Heinich, we have now digitized the entire collection of what we have back to, I believe, 88. Is that right? I think it's 88. I think it goes back to 1988. That's a lot of concerts. That's 20 concerts a year all the way back. And here's the part that allows it to all be through fair use. You go, I skipped a few steps here. You go to njvid.net, go to the institutional sign-in, go all the way to the bottom alphabetically to William Patterson, and then you get a screen that's just like your WP Connect screen. Last name, first initial, your password, and then you're in. And because all of this music is available only to William Patterson staff, employees, students, it still falls under the Fair Use Act. And so, for example, let's see if I can make this happen. You just go in. These are all student ensembles on this page. Click on a track. This is a concert from '06. Two of our saxophonists who've graduated, they did an ensemble on John Coltrane and Cannonball Adderley to open one of the concerts. And the fidelity is excellent. It's digital quality. If you close your eyes, you're at the concert. So it's an amazing archive for our students to go study. You can do it in terms of a title of music. So if you're learning any one of these, you want to learn Grand Central, it's probably been played on the Jazz Room series a dozen times over all that period. You can look at all the professional artists and the student ensembles who have played this piece. You can go and do it via artist. If you say, oh, I want to see Clark Terry, and see he's been on our Jazz Room series probably 3 or 4 times. Actually, also part of this, the video of the archive ceremony, I just realized this morning, is up there with a beautiful speech about William Patterson from Clark, something I've been looking for years, and now it's there. So it's a great resource to all of us, and I hope you'll visit it. It's a great illustration of exactly what we're talking about today. Thank you so much. Questions? Is that what we're going to? Wait.
We will have questions.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. You want me to just kill this?
Yeah, we can go back to.
Okay.
That's okay.
All right.
If you have any questions, we will give you the microphone to ask them. But I need. This is them. Oh, okay.
I have a very simple and naive question. For example, Professor Dempsey, you just showed the archive. What if someone wanted to capture part of that music that was played? Can you do that? And if so, how do you demonstrate, show credit for doing so?
Are you talking about capture a sheet, an image of a sheet of music, or capture part of that music that was just played? Well, part of the problem, oh, perfect, Dave just left, that's too bad. 'Cause he's, part of the problem is that the technology that we have is so far outstripping the laws that we have that we're all a little bit in the wild, wild west here. Because now it's just when we're starting to handle internet technology, now it's all mobile apps. So things can go right onto a phone. Part of it is the amount of the work, as you've heard previously. But in the archive, once again, it was exactly what you were talking about. We err on the side of respect for the artists that trusted us in donating the music. And in that case, respect for the artist who came here to perform. And so our guidelines are that you cannot take this music, that performance that was in our hall, you can't take it. There's a lot of other ways you can find recordings of this music, just don't use our way, because it's that particular concert. And I guess what I'm referring to more specifically is that the contract that artist signed was before this technology existed. So I'd rather not investigate those waters via an attorney. So we just take more care than we need to. But I think that a small amount of that would be usable via fair use.
Just to piggyback, I forgot your name, the English
Chris, yeah.
professor.
Chris?
Your students were taking clips of music from
Right.
various places to use in their video production. So I'm just asking the same kind of thing, because a student or myself, for example, if I go to the archive, I could take a clip of the recording with my phone, and so I'm just asking these questions because if our students are looking for music, for example, to make any kind of production, does it say that they could not take a sample?
Well, NJVid there's all sorts of, there's disclaimers on NJVid that are very clear. As you sign, I skipped about 4 steps to get to the page that I arrived at, but you have to go through all that understanding before you get there.
But I think you do raise an interesting question, which is, what are the obligations of people providing the media in whatever format to make it convenient or possible or difficult or impossible for somebody to copy them. And that's a legal question that's beyond me to answer. You could probably make a low-grade copy of just about anything, as you say, but whether you're entitled to or not. And I think you are entitled to. As long as you're using it fairly, you are, by just recording it on a cell phone. But you probably wouldn't be happy with the quality of that recording. So I think there's sort of two separate issues. One is, what are you entitled to as a teacher or as a student or as a citizen or anybody? And I think some of the talks that we've had about fair use at the very beginning indicate that we're probably entitled to a lot more than we think we are. But that does not translate necessarily, for instance, to William Patterson as an obligation to make that easy for you to get to.
Yeah, in a curious way, this NJVid project is protecting this music more than it was before, because when it was on CD in the library, it's a drag and drop. You can copy that instantly. You can get a 3-hour concert just by moving your mouse. Now you have to, A, listen to it in real time, and B, sacrifice quality. In other words, yeah, it's going to have to go from a speaker through the air to a cell phone. You can't get it digitally from there directly. You'd have to actually listen to it with a microphone somehow.
It was recommended to me by a copyright lawyer that if you are going to use, for example, lecture slides, which are provided to you from a publisher, when you provide those to your students, to do due diligence by putting a note there that these slides or this material is copyright protected and it is not for distribution. So that is recommended.
And if I can just add one more thing, to me, again, getting to the original questions we looked at, to me, a lot of the fair use is, what is the intent of taking that clip? If the intent is to use that clip to make a TV commercial, that's illegal. If the intent is to use the clip as part of a class, it's fair use. An immediate example, there's a commercial right now, and I cannot remember the name of the product, but it steals the introduction to one of Clark Terry's recordings with Oscar Peterson. But what they do is they fade it out before the actual melody of the piece comes in. But the introduction itself by Oscar Peterson is so brilliant that you hear, there's about maybe 2 pianists on the planet today that could reproduce it at an instrument. And that's clearly infringement, and I would make a bet that no money changed hands, because the melody doesn't show up, and it's the melody that's copyrighted. And this is just the piano introduction.
And I think that would be my answer as well, is what is the purpose to which you are putting that piece of music? If you're taking a clip so that your students can create a video for a class project, then I personally would argue very strongly in favor of it being fair use. But if it's being used for commercial purposes, if you're planning to somehow publish it in a CD that's accompanying a book that you are, that you've authored, then there would be more of an issue with using that. But my argument would be that a sample of it for a class project or for a lecture would certainly fit under fair use, if that is helpful.
No, I raise the issue both for myself and also for students who, and I can see in some classes, the professor is pretty clear about how and when the students can use it. But again, I'm just thinking of being preemptive, because students, because I've seen issues where not only here but elsewhere, people could go in and take samples of various pieces of music and make up something. And it could be for a class, which from everyone is saying it's fair use, but then one could see some entrepreneurial side to this. And so the line...
A lot of it is covered by due diligence, though. I mean, NJVid does its best to create barriers to people simply dragging and dropping, to people simply grabbing. And that is, my understanding is that courts do respect that due diligence. If you don't have any kind of a barrier, then you may be responsible if something is misused. But if you have put up clear obstacles such as password protection or a statement being very clear about those materials being available for educational but not commercial purposes, you're not going to be held responsible if then somebody uses a technology that maybe you haven't thought of yet, that you can't protect against. You're not going to be the one responsible. If the court case happens and that's been misused, then that person would be responsible for their misuse. But that's part of the reason that it's a good idea to make it very clear that you are posting materials. Like with my database, it's made very clear that the images in it are for educational use only. If a student takes a screenshot of that image and then does something commercial with it, that can no longer be my responsibility because I have made the effort, the good faith effort to prevent that from happening.
Okay, last question. We are kind of
as Heidi knows, I run the social media pages for the university galleries, which are open to the public, but we use them for educational purposes. And I'm wondering, is it enough that I'm posting images that are both low res and I'm citing the sources of the images, or should I be only using images that either are the property of the galleries or have Creative Commons? Like, can any of you speak to social media use for images or maybe even text too?
My personal feeling on it would depend a lot on the kind of image that you're posting. If you're posting a low res image, and for me, that would be that in terms of court cases, it's been pretty clearly established that a reproduction of a two-dimensional image is completely transformative. It is no longer seen as, so fair use absolutely applies because there is a clear distinction between the print and the photograph that you've taken of that print. And then adding the extra level of making sure that it's low res is would then continue to kind of make that a transformative work that's distinct from the original. Giving credit is always helpful in that. But it's a cultural institution, so I would argue that it's fair use. Now, if high resolution images get posted and they're without attribution, and the galleries start charging a fee to enter, then that would start to be more problematic. But as a nonprofit educational cultural institution, to me, I would argue that a low-res image is acceptable. And if it's not taken by someone in the gallery, or even if it is, it should be attributed.
We took a little bit more conservative approach. Every picture that we looked at, we looked for a license. And in fact, what we found was that some of the images were actually taken from other sources, so basically stolen. And we had to, it's sort of like a paper where you don't want to go with second references, you want to go with the primary reference. So we actually would look at the picture, do a search on the picture, and see whether or not, because usually you would be able to put it in and see how many sites were using it to see if we could find the primary source before we'd use them, just to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we have to finish this presentation. I want to thank everybody for contributing and participating, and we heard wonderful things, learned a lot. If you have any questions, you can stay maybe afterwards and talk to the panelists or other presenters. Thank you for coming. Thank you.